In a world of Robservations, one man brings you mirth and mayhem.
Hello, Rob, and fellow members of the Post-Geek Singularity community. During this time, when we've been asked to shelter in place and practice social distancing, you may be looking for some escapist fun. I wanted to suggest a series that is a personal favorite of mine, and which has been around for over 40 years. Wendy and Richard Pinney's Elfquest. Elfquest tells the story of a tribe of elves, the Wolf Riders, living in the forests of an Earth-like world. Their fairly peaceful lives are occasionally interrupted by skirmishes with primitive humans. One of these incidents takes a turn for the worse, forcing Cutter, the chief of the Wolf Riders, to lead his tribe in search of a new home. In the journey that follows, Cutter and the Wolf Riders will find a much bigger world outside their idyllic forest. As they encounter other tribes of elves, meet strange new creatures, and discover unknown lands, the Wolf Riders will learn about the history of this world and the great role they are bound to play in it. Elfquest is a series that is ripe for a television or movie adaptation. There have been attempts in the past, but sadly, nothing has ever materialized. I remain hopeful that a studio looking for an epic fantasy franchise will finally uncover this gem and give it the attention it deserves. With series like Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance, The Lord of the Rings, and The Wheel of Time being produced, this seems like the perfect time to bring Elfquest to the masses. In the meantime, we'll have to settle for their beautifully illustrated and written graphic adventures. If you are curious about stepping into this universe, you are in for a treat. The majority of the Elfquest series is available online for free. Every story published before 2014 has been digitized in full color over at elfquest.com. Hundreds of stories and thousands of pages are freely available to immerse you in this wonderful world. And if you'd like to continue reading on after that, the newest adventures are currently being published by Dark Horse Comics. So make sure you give Elfquest a try. I think you'll love it. A special shout out to fellow imagination connoisseur Trundell Quinn, who gave me the idea for this video over at the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page. Until next time, please stay safe and healthy.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your master of fun and wonder, your sommelier of sci-fi, your chancellor of cheerfulness, your existential Mr. Rogers, and of course, your Archduke of Banterbury, Robert Meyer Burnett. That's me. And I am here with Robservations, the show about something. Robservations episode number 372? My God. Wow. And you know why there's 372 episodes of Robservations? Because of you. Because of you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. You imagination connoisseurs. And I want to give a monstrous shout out to my man in Portland, Oregon, Roberto Suarez, the Puerto Geekian, for making that video. And I have to say, you know, I actually met Roberto when I was up in late January, early February, shooting crisis medicine footage. I got to meet Roberto. He actually bought me some drinks, me and Mike Shirts, Dr. Michael D. Shirts, MD, 18 Delta, the impresario behind crisis medicine. And it was great to meet him. He was really the first member of the Post-Geek Singularity that I met in that way. The first person was, of course, Captain Brad of the Washington State Ferry System, who actually came to Wenatchee almost a year ago. And it's great. I wish I could do more of that. I wish I could, do a cross-country tour and meet all of you imagination connoisseurs. But that video that he made about Elfquest, I thought was cool. I'm going to be releasing that as a standalone video on the Burnettwork YouTube channel, and I hope that you enjoyed it. I really like the production value that Roberto put into it, and I'd like to be doing more of that stuff. And if any of you want to send me videos like that, I will have to say that the music obviously has to be in the public domain so it doesn't get flagged by YouTube. And obviously, Roberto has set a bar in terms of the kind of technical polish and sheen that I would expect. So I want to thank Roberto for sending that in. But also, if anybody else wants to send that in about things that you're passionate about or things that you like, we are open for business. So, well, there's no business being... It's not even work for hire. I didn't know Roberto was going to do it, but since he did it, I played it. One day, perhaps, we'll all be on a paying basis here. But I wanted to thank him for doing that. And if anybody also wants to send in videos like that, I would encourage you to do so. And I will play them because it was fantastic. Anyway, Robservations, episode number 372. I, of course, am Robcasting. I'm like a love broker, like Bill Blazejowski from Night Shift. No, I'm Robcasting from the Robservatory, and today should be a barn burner of a show because I have many letters and there's lots to talk about, as there usually is. So welcome. One of the things that I find reassuring in the midst of what is a global crisis, the coronavirus, the COVID-19 global pandemic, things are starting to, we've gone over the hump in some places, and China has announced that they are going to open their movie theaters, which is, I think, a vote of confidence. It's certainly great for the industry at large. It's a way of bringing things back to normal, at least where the outbreak originally happened. And I think, and by the way, there's more I want to talk about in terms of China after this story. But I wanted to share this story because I found it uplifting. So I wanted to share it because, wow, the Na'vi and the Avengers are coming to the rescue in China. And let's jump right in. This is from the Hollywood Reporter today. Let's see who wrote it. Patrick Brzezinski, and this was dropped at last night at 9 in the evening. As China works to reopen its movie theaters and rebuild its local film industry, the country is turning to some superheroes for help. All 4 of Marvel's Avengers movies are set to be re-released in the country in the coming days and weeks. Joining the effort will be past Hollywood blockbusters including Avatar and Warner Brothers' Christopher Nolan films Inception and Interstellar. The blockbusters haven't received official re-release dates, but a source at one of China's nationwide cinema operators tells the Hollywood Reporter that they will be made available to movie theaters basically whenever the DCPs reach the cinemas. That would be digital cinema packages. After placing strict restrictions on hundreds of millions of people, China appears to have successfully gained the upper hand against the new coronavirus. On Wednesday, the Chinese province, and by the way, forgive my pronunciations, I apologize. On Wednesday, the Chinese province of Hubei, where the coronavirus pandemic got its start, began allowing its estimated 60 million residents to resume travel. Over the past week, some cinemas across the country, along with other public-facing businesses such as restaurants and shopping malls, began tentative experiments to reopen. As of Wednesday afternoon, there were an estimated 600 to 700 Chinese movie theaters open for business. Many of the theaters were smaller operators with just several screens located in remote regions of the country that were hit less hard by the epidemic during its peak in February. No nationwide Chinese cinema chains have announced a resumption of business yet, but more screens are switching on by the day. China's efforts to reboot its cinema exhibition infrastructure offers a preview of the challenges other countries currently in lockdown, such as the US, European nations, and all of India, will likely face when they eventually come out of the other end of the epidemic, or as we like to say, a pandemic, because it is. China's theater operators have faced two interrelated difficulties: convincing customers it is safe to return to the multiplex in large numbers, and convincing distributors that there are enough customers to resume marketing and releasing their most valuable film titles. And without the latter, it would seem hard to achieve the former. Over the past week, China's Film Bureau has introduced measures to help address the bottleneck. In a deal hashed out with Chinese studios last week, state-backed distributor China Film Group said it would allow local theaters to re-release a raft of past local blockbusters, including Wolf Warrior 2, The Wandering Earth, and Wolf Totem, among others, while giving cinemas the right to keep 100% of ticket revenue. I like this idea, by the way. The allowing cinemas to keep 100% of the ticket revenue will go a long way for theater owners and people that are out of work at cinemas to get paid. Local producers and distributors of the selected films agreed to forego their usual 43% cut of sales as a charity effort to help their financially battered exhibition partners get back on their feet. I really, really hope that U.S. Studios will follow suit, at least maybe for the first month. Maybe that's too ambitious, maybe 2 weeks. But I think it's a pretty good plan. Now it appears the Hollywood studios are putting forward some product too, although not for free. The rights holders of the U.S. tentpoles that are being brought back to Chinese screens will receive their usual 25% share of sales, according to a source at a Chinese theater chain. The Hollywood majors have received this 25% cut of ticket revenue since a 2012 U.S.-China trade deal. The split is already far below the usual 40% to 50% share that the studios receive in most markets around the world. And with cinemas currently shuttered in virtually every major market in the world, they would surely be loath to give it up in the one territory where business is beginning to resume. By the way, something to note right there, that the studios here only get 25% of the revenue made in China. Interesting, right? Re-releasing fan favorites can mean a big business in China. Back in 2012, a 3D re-release of James Cameron's Titanic earned $145 million. In 2018, Japanese anime master Hayao Miyazaki's 2001 classic Spirited Away earned $69 million from a China re-release. The Hollywood titles set for re-release over the coming weeks or months are among the most popular movies in China's box office history. Avatar earned a historic $202 million there in 2009, when China had just a small fraction of its current total of 70,000 movie screens. Inception took in $68.5 million in 2010. It has since developed a strong cult following, and Interstellar earned $122 million in 2015. The Avengers franchise, meanwhile, is by far China's favorite international film property. The 4 installments collectively grossed $1.3 billion in China. One amusing outcome of the re-release plans for analysts will be the additional lap it adds to the all-time box office race between Avatar and Avengers Endgame. The Marvel franchise closer is currently the reigning king, not adjusted for inflation, with $2.798 billion worldwide over Avatar's $2.744 billion total. What re-release dates will the two films receive? How many Chinese cinemas will have reopened by them? And how will the Chinese audience react? There is no end to this game, it seems. Okay, I'm delighted by this. How awesome might it be if Avatar reclaims its box office crown from Avengers Endgame for playing in China? I would love that. Now, also on this, first of all, before I get into starting this story, I really want to talk about this next thing. Director Stuart Gordon, obviously director of Reanimator, passed away at 72. I am a huge fan of Stuart Gordon. I am privileged to call him a friend. Through my friend Daniel Schweiger, I was able to meet him. And even back 22 years ago, when I was making Free Enterprise, and I was showing versions of the movie to various friends and family to hone the cut down and to see what worked best, Stuart was very generous of his time. And he came to, I think he came to 2 different screenings and gave me notes. And about 5 years ago, I was working with Stuart to raise the money to turn his one-man stage show, Nevermore, which starred the great Jeffrey Combs. I was working with director Darren Scott, another good friend of mine. I've edited a Lifetime movie he directed with him. He and I were trying to raise the money to turn Nevermore into a feature film. And during that time, Dennis Paoli, who obviously had worked for Stuart many, many times, had taken the one-man stage show and written a feature-length script out of it, had adapted it to film, and we were looking to raise money for that. It's something, even to this day, I still would love to do. And I will miss Stuart. He was a genteel man who had a wicked sense of humor, and he obviously started out in Chicago theater. He was one of the giants, to my mind, of the horror cinema of the last 30 years. Of course, he blazed, exploded. He decapitated his way onto the scene with, obviously, Reanimator, which we all know, starring, of course, Jeffrey Combs as Herbert West, and introducing the world to the absolutely delightful Barbara Crampton, who not only is one of the most beautiful women ever to grace a movie screen, certainly in a horror film, to this day remains one of the most delightful people that's on both social media and is still starring in all kinds of movies. And, you know, the loss of Stuart, he was only 72 years old, and he will be missed. And, you know, I showed this last night on social media, but one day I came into his office and he gave me mint condition. I mean, they were folded because one sheets were folded in the 80s, but he had given me mint condition posters, one sheets for both original one sheets for Reanimator, From Beyond, and Dolls, which he had signed and personalized to me. I always get, whenever I get an autograph, I always have it signed to me, to Rob, to Robert Meyer Burnett, to whatever, to me, because I'm not interested in getting anyone's autograph to sell. And he had personalized all 3 of those posters to me, and I, you know, I didn't ask. He just one day had them for me, and I was so. It's funny. I saw Dolls. I think I want to say it was at the Seattle Film Festival, but I saw it at the Pike Place Cinema. It's down like a little alleyway, Post Alley, and he was there when I saw Dolls, and I saw it with my friend Shade Roop, and it was a delightful experience, and I will miss Stuart, and I'm sad that I will never see him again. But anyway, Stuart Gordon, one of the greats, and if you have not, you have to watch Reanimator, you have to watch From Beyond, you have to watch Dolls. I actually really like his movie Space Truckers. He, of course, made Fortress and Robot Jocks, Castle Freak. He was just a great guy and a terrific filmmaker. And he did read up, Dennis Paoli published a thing, read up on his version of Peter Pan that he did for the stage, and he was arrested for it. Yes, indeed. Yeah, it's crazy. But he will be missed. A giant has left us, and a friend of mine, and I will miss him. So, indeed, ladies and gentlemen, here's to Stuart Gordon. Oh, wait a minute. You know what? I have a beer here, and it's a beer I could find that I think Stuart would like. It's a Voodoo Ranger beer with a, of course, you know, skeleton on it. So here's to you, Stuart. I can't imagine what you're doing in the beyond right now. Anyway, another thing I I wanted to say, and it's the next article that I wanted to cover. We that live on this planet, as our civilization encroaches in on the natural world, things are going to happen. It's not necessarily anyone's fault. It's not necessarily anybody's. It is part of the natural evolution of our planet, and no one should necessarily be blamed for a pathogen like Corona-19 exploding onto the world stage. Now, yes, are there practices that can be curtailed to stop the spread of things like this? Certainly. But it's happened all over the world since mankind started cutting down trees and moving into environments where humans never existed before. So no one necessarily should be blamed for this kind of thing. And to that end, I want to talk about this article that was also in the Hollywood Reporter today. Americans in Hollywood denounce Chinese virus and racist incidents. I want us to all understand there is no Chinese virus. A virus knows no nationality, and wherever and however it started, it does us no good to point fingers, ostracize, attack, or demonize Asian people. Shannon Lee, the daughter of martial arts film star Bruce Lee, recently wrote this message on her late father's Instagram, offering a not-so-subtle criticism of President Donald Trump and senior members of his administration who continually refer to the novel coronavirus, which has caused a global pandemic that has led to almost 500,000 confirmed cases of the disease COVID-19 and killed over 20,000 people, as a Chinese virus, despite the World Health Organization's warning against using geographic locations when naming illnesses. After all, the Spanish flu, started in Kansas City? The phrase is now linked to a wave of racist attacks against Asian and Asian Americans, from hate-filled messages on social media platforms to physical assaults in public. The Young Turks host Cenk Uygur, I never know how to pronounce his last name, tweeted about his children being bullied by classmates. Wei Zhejiang, CBS's News White House correspondent, posted that a White House official referred to COVID-19 as the Kung flu. Daniel Day Kim, who recently tested positive for the novel coronavirus, wrote it had been too heartbreaking to initially comment on the blatant acts of racism against Asian people during this outbreak. Social media campaigns such as hashtag Wash the Hate and Racism is a Virus, as well as a website by the Asian Pacific Policy and Planning Council documenting accounts of anti-Asian discrimination, have launched as an immediate response to Trump, aiming to shed light on misinformation about the novel coronavirus while also aiding Asians and Asian Americans under attack. In interviews over the past week, 6 Asian and Asian American actors, creative and advocates spoke with the Hollywood Reporter about incidents they've recently endured, reaction to Trump's attempts to racialize the pandemic, and how they and others in their community can advocate for truth and peace. Now, I will post this in the live chat, but I think it's really important to realize, here's the rest of this article. I think it's important to realize that nobody wanted this to happen. And, there are people that have been living a certain way for a very long time, and they haven't had this happen. And certainly certain cultural customs and things that come into play when this kind of thing happens, they're reassessed, reevaluated, and they will change. But to blame people, this could have happened anywhere. It could have happened in South America. It could have happened in Africa. It could have happened anywhere where you have the natural world and human beings living in close proximity to one another. There's a lot of this planet that we just don't understand and don't know. I mean, hell, maybe when James Cameron goes down to the bottom of the Mariana Trench next time, there is some kind of crazy pathogen that can, I don't know. There's all kinds of creatures we didn't even know they existed down that deep. So to blame any ethnicity for anything like this is unfair, and I think it's beneath us. What we have to do now is when something like this evolves or emerges, we have to all band together because we are the human race after all, and we all live on the globe together. I just want to say that because I think it's important. I think it's important to realize and to not blame anybody for an emergent pathogen. It could have happened on anyone's watch. So hopefully this will curtail certain practices that led to this. It also might help, say, pangolin trafficking and also some of the big animals, some of the most majestic creatures that live on this planet that deserve to be here in Africa. Hopefully this will curtail all kinds of both legal and illegal trade. We can only learn from it, and we should think of it as a learning experience, even though it's a very expensive and it's a very fatal lesson to learn. But anyway, enough of my I don't know what you'd call it. There's a lot to talk about, people. You all have sent me, I'm getting all kinds of crazy stuff from you all. So I'm just going to jump right into it. Andy Mays started throwing in, sending me all kinds of tips and craziness late last night. He wrote, "Hey Rob," he sent in 3. "Hey Rob, thanks for the Upstream color recommendation." That would be Shane Carruth's follow-up to Primer, if you haven't seen Primer. "One of my all-time favorite YouTubers, Eric Striffler, Pretty Much It, actually recommended that movie to me back in 2012, and I haven't thought of it since. Definitely going to be checking it out. But what I did watch this week, well, I had a Villeneuve double feature. I've already seen Blade Runner 2049, Arrival, and Sicario, so I watched Prisoners and Enemy and love them both. Prisoners, a toe-clenching, palm-sweating, captivating experience. Hugh kills it. And then Enemy, one of the craziest mind fucks I've seen, well, since Primer, probably. Jake Gyllenhaal kills it in both movies, but Enemy might be my favorite role I've seen of his. Yeah, a lot of people say Nightcrawler, but Enemy is an amazing, amazing movie. Villeneuve is a treasure. Would love to hear your thoughts on some of his work. Well, Andy, I'm a huge Denis Villeneuve fan. Incendies, I'll go all the way back to his, I think that's his first feature. He's an incredible director. I think he's a very intelligent director. He's a very methodical director. I really appreciate his style, and I appreciate the fact that he's very erudite. He definitely classes up the joint and elevates his material and makes it just amazing. Really, really amazing, amazing stuff. And I don't know. I can't say enough about his work. I'm a huge fan. I mean, how can you not be, really? I mean, how can you not be a monster fan of his work? Because it's pretty great. You know, it's pretty amazing, and I don't think anybody would have would ever dispute that. And that's why I'm so excited about Dune, because we have somebody who's bringing his intellect and his filmmaking prowess together. And I think we're going to get, and having read the script, yes, Warner Brothers, I read your Dune script, dated September 2018, and I loved it. I loved it. You didn't have to copyright strike my channel. Of course, perhaps I didn't have to maybe review it either, but okay. Willow, I gotta say, Willow, you always send me in a tip every day. You're too kind, and I want to thank you for supporting the channel in the way you do. Willow says, regarding Magneto, would you rather they give him a new power and say that he ages slowly and still make him a Holocaust survivor, or change his background and probably ethnicity to something that's closer to modern times? Well, I posted today on the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page, which I encourage all of you to go to. I did post a picture of Denzel Washington as Magneto, which I thought is dope. I think they're going to have to change his... they're going to have to change him in some way, shape, or form. But people have suggested, Roberto Suarez himself suggested that it should be the Rwandan genocide. But I don't think the Rwandan genocide is the same thing as the Holocaust. Not because it was Jews that died, but I don't think that internecine tribal warfare is necessarily the I don't think it's the same thing. You know, the destruction, the Holocaust was industrialized, and it was it really, it wasn't people chopping each other up with machetes running around on the countryside. It was literally a country at the height of its power that turned it used the modern era and mechanization and the way we could to destroy 12 million people. I think that's what's so monstrous about everything. It's just, it's horrifying. So I don't know how they can do it. I do think you have to change it. I don't think you could make it work and make him still a Holocaust survivor. I don't know how to do it, but yeah, who knows? Who knows? I don't know. But I do think they're going to have to change it. But I would love to see it be Denzel Washington. I mean, hell, you know, if anything, he could be more like in the comics, the conflict between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. There's no reason why you can't just have Magneto being more of an avenging angel about how the black man and the black women have been treated throughout history by other human beings, and make it all encompassing. So it's not just a single event like the Holocaust, but it could be the treatment. I mean, what's more powerful than, especially in America, you know, we've talked a lot about our history of slavery. Maybe he was born out of that, you know, and that alone could be interesting, because slavery too, like the Holocaust, it was a trade. I mean, it was and even more monstrous, it was economic. And there could be something, I think they could really make that. I mean, I would love to see Denzel Washington as Magneto, frankly. I have no problem changing his ethnicity at all. The same way I loved seeing when the Black Nick Fury was introduced in Ultimates, in the Marvel's Ultimate series. I had absolutely no problem with that. So it was, I mean, what a fantastic casting, if you could get him to do it. And if you look at the picture I put up on the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page, damn, does he look good as Magneto. I would love to see that. I mean, just because I love Denzel Washington. I have since, I think, Glory, maybe. I love everything he's in. I mean, I don't know why, but I just find him to be this incredibly charismatic screen presence. And he always seems to be, no matter what he's doing, you know, I always feel like you're getting somebody who's delivering everything they have to every performance. And of course, now he's Fences, he's directing, and he's just one of the great talents in Hollywood. And boy, I'd love to see him play Magneto, and he looks great in that maroon suit. But check that out on the Post Geek Singularity Facebook page, and go say hi to the Richard while you're there. Amir B sent in a super chat and said, "Hi Rob, the first half of Contagion, Steven Soderbergh's Contagion from 2011, which, by the way, is, watching it now, it's one of the most prophetic movies you can possibly imagine. The first half of Contagion seems like a movie adaptation of the current pandemic so far, but from 9 years ago. Super eerie." Well, Amir, it is super eerie. It's so eerie, I can't even... the only difference between what's going on now and what Soderbergh shows us in Contagion is that in Contagion, the fatality rate with the disease, with the, I think it's MER, I don't know exactly what it's called, is actually 25 to 30% fatality. But that I just watched it the other day. It's unbelievably compelling. If you haven't seen Steven Soderbergh's Contagion, it's an all-star cast, but it's almost like an Irwin Allen movie from the 70s. But it is a very clinical, very sober, very matter-of-fact telling of the outbreak of a global pandemic, and it came, you know, on the heels of SARS and MERS, and it's really, it's an unbelievable movie. I love the film. I love the filmmaking in it. I love the cast. I mean, my God, everybody, Kate Winslet, Gwyneth Paltrow, Matt Damon, it's unbelievable, that cast and that film. My God, is it great. Bronze Age Slacker sends in a super chat and says, "New online comic publisher AWA has a free comic, The Resistance, written by J. Michael Straczynski. It's short but cool and oh so topical." I did not know that, Bronze Age Slacker. well, I must check that out. Absolutely. Hey, listen, I'm going to do something I don't usually do, but I'm going to take a quick break. Give me 3 minutes. I have to deal with a situation. Give me 3 minutes. I'm going to take care of that. I will be right back. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. You know, being a one-man band sometimes is something you can't escape, even when you're live on YouTube internationally. Now, the one last thing that I wanted to share today, and how could I not? How could I not, ladies and gentlemen? Because in anticipation of tonight's, well, it's the final episode of Star Trek Picard, which drops at midnight tonight. And look, I'll give it to Gary Beekler, Nerdrotic. He's always quick on the draw and the first person out to review the show. And I do watch his reviews. I'll watch Picard, and then before I go to bed, I will watch his review. I am not going to do that. I will obviously be talking about it tomorrow. And for those people who are tired of listening to me talk about Picard, well, there's only one more day of it. But this article was sort of interesting. Michael Chabon was being interviewed in Variety by Adam B. Vary, and he says Star Trek Picard is divisive, however you want to pronounce it, and showrunner Michael Chabon doesn't mind at all. It takes almost no time at all when talking with Michael Chabon to realize that the Pulitzer Prize-winning author of The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, which, by the way, is a fantastic book, and I recommend it to all, is a diehard Star Trek fan. Given that he's the showrunner of the latest Trek iteration, Star Trek Picard, he became that halfway through this season. The 56-year-old has found it particularly satisfying to engage with the vast Trek fandom as the first season of Picard heads into its finale on Thursday. Quote, to get people super nerdy and super technical questions about what kind of class of starship is meant to be in that one image that you can only see if you freeze frame, that's been so fun. Shaban says via Skype while sitting in his home office in Berkeley, where he's been sheltering in place with his wife, author Elliot Waldman. By the way, they co-wrote last week's episode, and 2 of their 4 children amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Picard has been a major success for CBS All Access as the most watched original title to date for the streaming service. Precisely how many viewers the show's received remains a secret known only to Viacom CBS, but its popularity is no surprise considering Picard marks the return of Patrick Stewart's revered Enterprise skipper Jean-Luc Picard to series television after 7 seasons on Star Trek The Next Generation from 87 to 94. The 4 feature films spanning 94 to 2002, I would be remiss if I did not mention that you can watch all of Star Trek Picard for free if you sign up for CBS All Access now. You can cancel that, but you do have to sign up. But you can watch Star Trek Picard for free right before its premiere, which leads me to believe it might not be as successful as they're saying it is. But Picard hasn't been a typical Star Trek show. Rather than reunite Jean-Luc with his old crew from TNG, Shaban and his collaborators, executive producer Alex Kurtzman, Kirsten Beyer, and Akiva Goldsman, introduced the character to a brand new cast, including Issa Briones as Soji, a highly advanced android. I've noticed that Kirsten Beyer has been noticeably absent from the writing credits of the last couple episodes. Alison Pill is Dr. Agnes Girardi, a high-strung cyberneticist. Michelle Hurd is Rafi Mosquir, a former Starfleet colleague of Picard's who has fallen on hard times. And Santiago Cabrera as Cristobal Rios, the captain of the small starship Picard conscripts on a mission to find and protect Soji. You know what? I'm going to zip ahead. I'm just going to go right to the interview. Now that season 1 of Picard is almost done, how have you been feeling about the season and experiencing the fan response to it? It's been pretty exciting, says Shaban. I think inevitably I spent a fair amount of time looking around on Twitter and Reddit, trying to get a sense of people's responses. Twitter's kind of a horrible place too, so I wasn't really encouraged to spend too much time looking around. But then I came up with this forum, setting up an Instagram story once a week to take people's questions. One of my children showed me how you could use Instagram in that way, and that's been really fun for me. As someone who spent a fair amount of time over the years on Memory Alpha, looking on Reddit, enjoying the way people enjoy Star Trek online, it's been so fun to see the show getting absorbed into the kind of greater corpus of Star Trek. What makes me feel good is when I see it being treated, in a sense, the same by fans as previous versions of the show. That does cut both ways. Right. Part of what you're talking about is, for example, the way I felt about Star Trek The Next Generation when it premiered. I was sitting in front of my TV watching Encounter at Farpoint, and I hated it. I kind of hate-watched it, although we didn't have that term then, for most of the first season. At some point in the second season, I realized, oh wow, that was a good episode. The show actually did get better. It takes a while to figure out what a show is. God, I can't stand hearing people say that. As someone who's watched a lot of Star Trek, you're comparing something that you've now seen once with huge expectations to something that in some cases you've seen hundreds of times. It takes a while for you to shed your expectations, your biases, your prejudices. I was prejudiced in favor of Mr. Spock, Captain Kirk, Dr. McCoy. It took a long time to lose that. Let me just say that while Encounter at Farpoint might not be the greatest episode of Star Trek, what they were trying to do by reinventing Star Trek, by changing it completely, other than giving Dr. McCoy, who was never mentioned by name, a cameo appearance now as an admiral in Encounter at Farpoint, they were trying to recapture something. What they were trying to do with the first season of Star Trek The Next Generation really, to that degree, had never been attempted, or it certainly had never worked on television. And the first season of Next Generation, they were trying to figure things out, and it was very tumultuous. Dorothy Fontana and David Gerrold, 2 linchpins of the original series, left early on in the development of Next Gen. There was a lot of jockeying going on. Leonard Maizlish, Gene Roddenberry's lawyer, was really a poison pen or a poison pill in the he was gumming up the works of the show. And Next Generation, in its first season, does have respectable episodes. Like I have always mentioned, The Big Goodbye, which won, I believe, a Peabody Award. Heart of Glory, the first Klingon episode, other than episodes of Worf. 11001001. I even think an episode like Haven was respectable. So the first season of Next Generation, while certainly not hitting its stride, is not the car crash people would have you think it is. As someone who's watched a lot of Star Trek, let me go on. You're familiar with the ways that Trek fans can respond to new iterations of Trek. I actually went back and looked on Google Groups, which acquired Usenet. So you can look through the old Usenet groups and watch what people said about Deep Space Nine and then about Voyager. They fucking hated it. They lacerated it. I mean, plenty of people liked it and loved it. But the criticisms that are being leveled against Deep Space Nine and then against Janeway, the female captain, or Black Vulcan, all of the things that were problematic for a certain contingent of so-called Star Trek fans back then, the way that they attack each other and the way that they attack the show, it's identical to now. They could just turn them into 140 characters or whatever, and it's now on Twitter, and you could make tweets out of them, and it would still work just as well for Discovery or Picard. So were there things about Picard that you knew you wanted to do that you could sense would test some boundaries for fans? Sure. To the extent that I was aware of the kind of toxic fandom, the anti-social justice warrior, sad little corner of fandom, you just disregard that. Sometimes you're motivated to have things simply because it's possibly going to piss people off or provoke people who seem to have missed the memo about just what exactly Star Trek is and has always been about. In the course of the season, we show the death of Icheb, who was a recurring character on Voyager, and the death of Hugh, who was a recurring character on TNG. When we talked about it, we definitely had a sense of there's probably going to be some people who are upset that these characters have died, and we were okay with that because we thought in both cases neither death was gratuitous. Really? Icheb's death wasn't gratuitous? The death of Icheb has now become part of the story of Seven of Nine. It felt completely called for, and we couldn't have told her story without it. Really? Okay. I mean, the death of Icheb is upsetting partly because it's fairly gruesome, which I understand, but also because, he's so powerless. He has no agency. He's really a victim. So somebody who is a victim of the Borg to begin with, you're going to have them, and survived, you're going to have them be the victim of some 2-bit crime syndicate, but okay. So he's been victimized twice. You're victimizing a victim. But anyway, he's really a victim. But that isn't the case with the death of Hugh. He dies trying to do what he's been trying to do his entire adult life, which is help former Borg. His death felt meaningful. Did it? Did it really? Okay. I will say I don't think I quite understand that there's going to be people who would be upset about a character's death regardless of how that character died. That's simply the fact of a character dying. That was not okay with them. Even if I had known that, I would have ultimately dismissed it because it seems I just don't understand television in that way. You spent so much of your career as a novelist, and this is the first time you've been in charge of a season of television where you're watching the story unfold and seeing the reaction over many weeks. It's weird, yeah. I mean, one possible response that I could have had, and I think some of my partners on Picard do have, is to ignore it all completely, or just to take a little glance, maybe look at Rotten Tomatoes, see what kind of consensus of the reviews from the critics have been, which has been pretty darn favorable, and just sort of leave it at that. Because I consider myself to be a part of Star Trek fandom, and I have been since I was 10 years old, I've read fan fiction, I've collected fanzines, I would never have denied myself the opportunity to participate in Picard, not just as the co-creator, showrunner, and producer, but as a fan too. And so I do want to be engaged. I've gone maybe half a dozen times since this season started to look on Reddit. I will say the quality of comment and of criticism on Reddit is so much vastly higher than it is on Twitter, even some quite strongly negative criticism. It tends to be much better reasoned, much better supported with evidence in a way that I can respect and engage with and listen to. Well, because Twitter only has so many characters. But the links to my show are there. What has it been like to experience this kind of storytelling where fans are reacting as things are still in progress? You know, if you're watching a 1 hour episode of pre-2010 Star Trek, all of them, except for long swaths of Deep Space Nine toward the end of its run, have been episodic. It could have been a character having dark issues. You could even introduce a certain dystopian element into an episode of Star Trek. You could introduce that in Act 1, and any fan would be willing to tolerate that. They would be willing to tolerate a character having a substance abuse problem or not being nice to their fellow crew members, as long as it got put back to rights at the end of the episode. When you do it in episode 1 or 2 of a 10-episode season and that character's problem doesn't really get resolved until the last couple of episodes, a lot of people can't tolerate that. And that's really interesting. Again, it's a question of expectations, of biases. You come to Star Trek, I think, as a fan, especially if you've watched all the episodes many, many times, with the expectation that you won't have to tolerate that kind of level of darkness for long. So that when a show in this era asks you to do what you were readily willing to do with a show like Westworld or Breaking Bad or whatever, somehow the mere fact that it's Star Trek makes it hard to accept. And I get that. It's a little weird for me, too, both in conceiving the show and sometimes if I can give myself enough distance as I'm watching the episodes as they're dropping, I can feel this show, this deep wiring in my brain that wants Star Trek to be episodic. I can remember how odd it felt watching these serialized episodes of Deep Space Nine. I wasn't entirely sure I liked it then either. It was so far ahead of its time. I appreciate it because they were dealing with a very greatly disturbed moment in the history of the Federation with the Dominion War. It felt appropriate. I respected it, and I understood it, and it made me uncomfortable as a Star Trek fan. So it's been interesting for me to get back to your original question, watching the response unfold in real time and being unable to understand where a lot of this is coming from as a fan. It's made it easier for me to accept when fans express their displeasure, but it's human nature to focus on that stuff and to kind of ignore the fact that the vast majority of fan response seems to be really positive. And, you know, I've been gratified to see a lot of people who do like the show taking other people to task so that I don't have to. Okay. You know, I want to do the Oscar Goldman. I want to be like Steve. And that was way before David Caruso did it on CSI Miami. Here's what I find really frustrating about even the creators, even Pulitzer Prize winning, Nebula and Hugo Award winning Michael Chabon. I don't like the fact that somehow criticism of Star Trek is for other reasons other than the fact, in my experience, people that like Star Trek are pretty savvy viewers. And it's not because they want it to be the way Star Trek was in the 60s or the 80s or the 90s or even the aughts. They don't want Star Trek to be a certain way, make it the way it was. That's not the reason at all. Serialized storytelling is not the reason why Star Trek fans are not responding, or I guess a vast majority are, but some aren't. All I would say is there's a reason they're giving away Picard for free. That would be something I would pose. But I am tired of this criticism of us, of fans, of Star Trek fans that don't like something. That they only like things the way it was before. No, that's not true at all. And I have been involved in fan communities I bought fanzines too, for a long time. And do you know what fans want? They want what Stephen King once said in a very simple phrase, a great story well told. Your fan base will go with you anywhere. They don't care if it's episodic. They don't care if it's serialized. The hardcore fans want great stories well told. And when you're talking about just willy-nilly killing characters, two characters, by the way, two former Borgs that were put on the chopping block in very, perfunctory ways. Icheb, the way he was killed, well, this is really Seven's story. What the fuck story is that? how she became a Fenris Ranger, and how the last time we saw Seven, we haven't seen her since Voyager. What story have you told? You've basically told us a bunch of stuff about her. What is the story actually that is being told on the show about Seven? And you used the death of a former character from Voyager that was a compatriot of hers as a really lame shortcut. And then you killed him in a gruesome way. You can't have it both ways. And I find it really disappointing to listen to the creators of this show blame the criticism on fans and their inability to what? Not like, I don't want Star Trek to be like it was in the 60s. I don't want Star Trek to be like it was in the animated series or in the movies or in the Next Generation or in Deep Space Nine or Voyager or in Enterprise. What I want is I want great storytelling. The way, I don't know. I talked about one of my favorite movies today on the John Campea Show. All About Eve. One of the greatest screenplays I think ever written. I want this kind of storytelling, whatever it may be. The quality of the kind of storytelling that Joseph Mankiewicz brought to this movie, I want it applied to Star Trek. That's it. That's what I want. That's all. And when I'm hearing somebody like Michael Chabon, whose work I greatly admire, talk about things the way he's talking about them, I'm like, why don't you put the same kind of acumen you put into your Nebula and Hugo Award-winning books into Star Trek? And you know, I don't understand it. That's all fans want. It's not that they want things the way they were, but they want things, if they're watching Star Wars or Star Trek or Doctor Who or they're reading Marvel Comics, they want the kind of storytelling that made those things last for decades to continue on into the new decades. That's what people want. They want great storytelling. That's it. That's it. They want their storytelling to make sense. They want their stories to be true to the entire legacy of the many, many decades that these things have endured. I mean, I find it really interesting that Doctor Who, which predates Star Trek, and Star Trek, they're both over half a century old. Star Wars is 43 years old. It's approaching half a century old. So the storytelling has been there, and we all know what we like and what we don't like, and we know why these stories have endured and have been pop culture mainstays for as long as they have. And it's not because fans want things. Look, what he was talking about, the fan resistance to TNG and Deep Space Nine and Voyager were absolutely there. And I was one of those people that was never a fan of Voyager when it aired. Was never a fan. So I know that he's absolutely correct. But I think that the reasons people didn't like things were different. They're not the same reasons. It's not just Star Trek fans going, well, this isn't like the Star Trek that I fell in love with, so I'm going to reject it. No. I mean, Voyager, the problem that Voyager had was that it was a copy of a copy of a copy. It was a show about Star Trek tropes. And sure, they had unique things like Captain Janeway, but it was like, let's have the half-alien, half-human character in B'Elanna Torres. Or we won't have Data, but we'll have the holographic Doctor. So what they did was they took all of these Star Trek tropes and they made a show out of it. And then it went back to being Star Trek, like the original series, a ship going from place to place. They tried to give it an overarching, something different, but they didn't buy into their own premise. You know, their own premise was, here's a ship cut off from the Federation, and from the very beginning, like, we're going to try and get home. What they should have done is embrace the premise and said, we're never getting home. What we're going to have to do, we have to resolve ourselves to build a Federation beachhead. How can we bring a little bit of the Federation to a lawless land when we have no choice? How can we do that? How can we build coalitions? And they went in a different direction because they didn't jump into their premise. And Deep Space Nine, they had a new premise, but they didn't know what they were gonna do with it for a while. That's why if you watch Deep Space Nine from season to season to season, seasons 1, 2, and 3, the premise keeps changing. It really isn't until the Dominion War breaks out and becomes, well, first we see it as the Klingons going to war. But seasons 4, 5, 6, and 7 of Deep Space Nine sort of coalesced into something new, and it finally really found its own way and its own premise, which was, here was a frontier outpost that literally was in the middle of a galactic conflict. And it was very interesting, and that's when Deep Space Nine finally came into its own. But it's hard to make a new sci-fi show. And I think the problem that I have with Picard, my overreaching problem, is that you have over 50 years of Star Trek to look at. The good, the bad, the not so good. And what I want is, again, a great story well told. And I feel they haven't done that for me, but that's just me. Boy, we'll know tomorrow, won't we? I mean, yes, we will, ladies and gentlemen. We will know. So let's see. First of all, you know what? I have to put my glasses back on. I need to get some cool, like, Tom Ford glasses. I'm not spending that kind of money anytime soon, but it'd be pretty cool. Let's see. Let's go back to what you guys are saying. There's a few comments here. Jeremy Belpois sends in a tip and says, 2020 is going to be a movie. Yeah. Endgame. That's pretty funny. I like that. Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, DS9 is great, and I'd encourage people to watch all the episodes. If you don't want to watch it all, there's an article by Max Temkin that's picked out 80 or so essential episodes. Ooh, well, that's interesting. I'm going to check that out. Let me put that in the live chat. Let's see. So there you go. Alexander Wilson sends in a super chat and says, first of all, let me just say what I'm going to tell you about how to watch Deep Space Nine. The first season is rough, but not like TNG rough. It's just kind of bland. But the first season of Deep Space Nine, if you watch, and I found this to be pretty interesting, if you watch the pilot, Emissary, and then you watch Duet, the penultimate episode, and the last episode of the first season, In the Hands of the Prophets, if you only watch those 3 episodes and then go right, that's not to say that I understand there's a lot of episodes. That means you're going to miss 23 episodes of season 1. And there is some good episodes. Move Along Home is not one of them. But there are some good episodes. But just those 3, and then you watch the 3-parter that opens season 2 of Deep Space Nine, that's a pretty satisfying 6 episodes of Star Trek, and that'll get you invested enough in the series, and then maybe look into these episodes. I don't know. Alexander Wilson sends in a super chat and says, didn't you have Eric McCormack's character diss TNG and Free Enterprise? Actually, it was Rafer's character. He says he'll never live in the 24th century, only the original series. Was that a Freudian slip? Also, the first half of Voyager did nothing for me. Well, Alexander, I think you're right. I mean, I liked the first season of Voyager for the most part, but by the opener of season 2, the 37s, man, I was so out. But you're right. I mean, it doesn't get really interesting until the Borg are involved, and there's a lot of great stuff that's going on. But I do think that it wasn't Eric McCormack. It was the Robert character who disses the 24th century. He says, he literally fucking says he fucking hates the fucking Next Generation. He says it. The reason that we put that in there is because Free Enterprise actually was sort of born out of my... when I was working on the Star Trek Experience, I was making a 5-minute compilation video. It was going to be my final word on Star Trek. And in this 5-minute video, I was encompassing the entire original series. I had every planet the Enterprise ever visited. I had every time Dr. McCoy said, I'm a doctor, not a moon shuttle conductor or whatever. I had every woman that Kirk kissed. I had every person that Spock actually... administer the Vulcan nerve pinch to, and also a lot of dialogue, a lot of lines and things like that. And when I sent it in, and keep in mind this was going to play in the Star Trek Experience, so you could stand and watch it, but it had to be approved by Rick Berman's office, And it was Rick Berman himself. I got the note back. It wasn't sent to me. It was sent to Landmark Entertainment in general. The note was too much original series. And I was so incensed by that. And I told Mark Altman, and we were working on a totally different script. We were working on our magnum opus, our Jewish horror movie that was called Day of Atonement. It's too late to be forgiven. And it just wasn't working. We had to turn in this script, and as a lark, Mark read to me a scene from something he was calling Trekkers at the time, and that's where Free Enterprise was born. But I told him about my frustration about the original series being sort of marginalized in the wake of Star Trek The Next Generation and Voyager. Voyager was on, along with Deep Space Nine. TNG was over by that point, but everybody was all TNG, and they were dissing on the original series. So Free Enterprise was sort of born out of my frustration about that. So anyway, Dirty Nerdy sends in a tip and says they're giving away Picard for free because it's crap and they know it. Even if they fire Kurtzman, we'll still forever stuck with his canon. What a tragic end to a beautiful franchise. Well, I don't think that Star Trek will end, but they're sweeping pronouncements. They've done these things like the whole AI at the end of Discovery, season 2, and the Discovery going 1,000 years in the future and all this stuff. They it's one thing to do it one story set in the Star Trek universe, but to do these overarching things that they've done. I mean, it's like the article I read yesterday from the Mary Sue. They have to make everything universe destroying. So now we know that somewhere out there is some synth godlike race that has been destroying all of the biological life forms in galaxies, and they're still out there. I mean, there's no way in the Star Trek universe you can combat something like that. I also think that at least in the Star Trek universe, along with one of the things about Voyager is it shows even at high warp velocities, it will still take 75 years to get home, which speaks to just how big one galaxy is. But when you're willy-nilly just creating, well, there's this multiple galaxy spanning synths that they destroy all biological life forms. I'm like, what are you, 12? Again, we'll see what happens. Maybe they made that up. Who knows? Maybe it was just a warning. The idea that an 8-star system would not be ever discovered by, I don't know, anybody except the Zhat Vash. Whatever. I don't know. Yeah, we are, though, Dirty Nerdy, stuck with that canon, and it's annoying. It's really annoying. Because the realism, what I really hate about modern Star Trek is there's no effort to create verisimilitude. Unfortunately. Dancing Dog sends in a tip and says, Robert, in your opinion, why did NBC cancel Star Trek back in 1969? Was it just a matter of ratings, or is it that science fiction cannot survive on network television besides something action-oriented like $6 Million Man? Well, Dancing Dog, Star Trek it never did in the ratings what they wanted it to do. Although they weren't looking at demographics. And if they did look at demographics, it probably would have survived, unfortunately. And I think it was just low ratings, and they kept it on. Remember, there was a huge letter writing campaign that actually saved it for a third season, but they cut the budget. They got rid of Roddenberry. Fred Freiberger was put in charge, and they gave it that Friday night, 10 o'clock at night death slot where their very audience was out. They're not going to sit around on a Friday night and watch TV. They're out, in bars trying to get laid, as Star Trek fans are still doing even today. So there you go. And I think it was inevitable. It wasn't because it was just science fiction. It was never number one in the ratings. It was always an also ran, but they didn't judge TV shows by their demographics at the time, unfortunately. Alexander Wilson sent in a super chat and said, my knowledge of Free Enterprise must be fading. Yours and the entire population of the world. It's been like a dozen years since I watched it. Now I see it's available to watch with Amazon Prime. Why didn't you tell us? It spoke to me as a kid. The reason that I don't tell people that Free Enterprise is available on Amazon Prime is, one, it's a shitty 4x3 transfer. I don't like the sound mix. There's things I fixed in the 2006 version of it. I'm not as proud of that movie as I would like to be. I still would like to do my definitive version for 4K, which I'm hoping against hope somehow I might be able to do that. but we shall see. But yes, it is available to stream on Amazon Prime. Although, and it's there. It's just, I think that version of it is amateur hour. Not that, and it was the first and only movie I've directed. But yes, I'm still proud of the film, and I think a lot of people would like it if they checked it out. But yeah, yes, indeed. So anyway, I have so many great letters, ladies and gentlemen, so many great letters, and I'm going to let me jump into them. Let me get them. And I'm just going to, you know what? I'm just going to start. I'm just going to jump into it. I think I've got 23 letters. John Ciccarelli writes, "Hey, Rob. Hope you're well. In this time of COVID, I came across a list of coping strategies that you can employ matching up Star Trek Picard characters. They were pretty lame, so I decided to create my own. Coping mechanisms, Star Trek Picard edition. Which coping mechanism do you employ? Picard. Have several random people yell at you for no apparent reason. Attempt to say something profound that falls on deaf ears. Throw up your hands, sigh, and aimlessly meander onto the next yell fest. Raffi. Contribute absolutely nothing to the situation you're in. Bring up that you have a neglected family member that you've never mentioned and disappear to see them. And have random romantic feelings for someone who apparently ruined your life. Rios. Concoct a plan to get those deadweight crew members off your sweet ride and hook up with your old trading pal Quark for a lost weekend of Dabo girls with questionable sanity. 7. Channel all of your rage and newfound Borg technology into a vendetta to hunt down the Doctor who once became aroused in Agnes. Visit a hospital of recovering patients and murder several of them while puking up red velvet cake and crying. Elnor. Continue to take more heads. Do not fight on holy ground. Live forever and one day claim the prize. Admiral Clancy. Continually berate and curse out subordinates and those trying to give you intel while always looking constipated. Soji. Randomly appear to have robot characteristics to have people assume a convenient fact about yourself and go sliding with that special emo someone. Take it sleazy. John. Well, John, I chuckled. Thanks for that one. This next one comes from Doug Harris. Doug says, "Thank you, RMB, for the mental break of worrying how my family and I are going to survive. While I generally agree with you about most things, one of the things that you say about the sequel trilogy about Star Wars that I don't is when you say the sequel trilogy is going to be someone's Star Wars. I don't agree. Let me explain. Star Wars, now A New Hope, was geared towards a younger audience and attracted them and imagination connoisseurs of all ages. The sequels, especially Return of the Jedi, leaned into the kid audience. Lucas's target audience for the prequels were kids of the original audience. Those films, however you feel about them, had an audience they were made for. Now, on to the sequel trilogy. Bob Iger's target audience for that new trilogy was everybody. Because of that, it attracted no one. When they first announced the new trilogy, I never thought that Han, Luke, Leia were going to be the main characters throughout the entire trilogy. I thought they would be for the first, and then they would be phased out by the third, leaving us with new characters. I believe the problem starts with this issue with The Last Jedi. I know I just stepped on an internet landmine. The Last Jedi is the first Star Wars movie that doesn't feel like one. I feel like I'm watching a family-friendly version of Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven or John Wayne's The Shootist. Ooh, good reference. As dark as movies like Dark Crystal or Temple of Doom got, there was still that unexplainable spark or fun that still made them kids' movies, or at least ones that kids could enjoy. Add to that The Last Jedi is sandwiched between a movie that isn't a movie, but a pilot, The Force Awakens, and a confusing, convoluted Frankenstein's monster of a movie, The Rise of Skywalker. I can't see how kids get that same enjoyment from this trilogy. I don't disagree with you. The magic of Star Wars for me, and I think most people, is that from a moment a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away appears to the closing credits, we become five-year-olds again. Even in the prequels, there are scenes that I get that feeling from. I can't think of any single scene from the sequels that I get that feeling from. That brings me to the new characters that I touched on earlier. I don't feel like I know any of them. In contrast, I feel like I knew everything about Leia when she stared down Vader, or Luke looking at the twin suns, and Han when he shot Greedo in the cantina. I can't see kids getting attached to the new characters. I'm probably wrong, but with much better alternatives like the MCU and any of the Pixar movies. I don't see this being anyone's Star Wars. I know all of the alternatives I gave are all Disney, but they have the family movies kind of cornered at the moment. Doug Harris. Well, Doug, hail fellow well meant. I mean, I totally agree with you. I mean, one of the things about, and I don't think it can be underestimated. When you watch Star Wars, it opens with a bang on the Tantive 4, the blockade runner, and then of course you have you meet R2 and 3PO, who are kind of the peasants right out of Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress, and then you meet Princess Leia, and you meet Vader, and the stormtroopers, and the situation is set up, and it's dire, and we see all that. But then you meet Luke Skywalker, who is living with his aunt and uncle on a moisture farm because they're on a desert planet, so they literally farm moisture, which makes sense, kind of cool on a desert planet. But you get to see his home life. You get to see he's bored to tears. He's sick of working on this in this shithole ass into space, and you really get a sense of who he is. He is all of us. We all get it. We all recognize we are with Luke because we are Luke. We are Luke. They tried to do that with Rey, except when you are meeting Rey, I think the biggest problem is you're asking yourself, why do you live like this? The idea that you're waiting for your parents and that you're living in this walker that fell over is really, really dumb. It's not like if her parents came back, they wouldn't land at where Uncle Plutt's space dock is or whatever. Like, why is she waiting there? It seems monumentally stupid. She's a scavenger, so it's like you don't relate to Rey. You know why? No verisimilitude. With Luke, you totally believe that guy. You believe his situation. We all understand. But with Rey, Rey is like all of J.J. Abrams' storytelling. It's all a bunch of this shorthand, and we're supposed to get it. Like I have a lot of people that tell me, "Well, don't you understand? She's our blah blah." I'm like, no. You have to make, even in the Star Wars universe, you have to make the storytelling believable. And with Luke, it's utterly believable because he's all of us. It doesn't matter. We all get it. We all understand. So we're with Luke because we are Luke. Not all of us are Rey. You watch this and you're like, why are you living here? Why are you doing this? Why do you believe that your parents, it's not like your parents are, unless they left in a spaceship and you were all living in this felled walker, like, why would you think they're coming back? And why aren't you being proactive? If you're going into town, did you ever stop and go, hey, man, do you know where my parents are? Do you remember my parents? Aren't there people? Like, she's got peeps. She goes in and does business with Uncle Plutt. Why doesn't she get a job? I just, and it was so unimaginative. Like I've told people, if I was making Force Awakens, I would have made Rey a pilot, that she's literally scavenging space junk in orbit. It's a ship that Uncle Plutt gives her, and she gets paid by whatever she finds, and she flies down and lands and pays them off. That would show that she's a pilot, that she's proactive, and then you reveal why she's living in that shithole, because she's waiting for her parents to come back. You still play all those scenes out, but you make them believable. But in a movie, anyway, shoulda, coulda, woulda. I hate talking about things about how they should have been done when they can't. Anyway, Desmond Harris with another letter. Hello, Toy Man. Thank you for sharing your perspectives on my letters. The utmost respect. Industry topic. I'm confused with this fascination of people pushing stories to explain everything. What's the history of the Borg? Where do they come from? What is Vader's backstory? What is the Emperor's backstory? What's General Zod's childhood? Isn't the point of great stories to display a great threat that you or the hero cannot explain? or think how the heck are they meant to overcome that threat or situation. When thinking back to the majority of the great stories, whether a motion picture or written, great stories have great threats and villains. It seems a lot of things are being watered down or diluted down for thinking towards style and no substance. Your thoughts kindly, Desmond. You know what, Desmond? Here's my thought on all this. Because it's the easiest route to storytelling. You know, wanting to explain where the alien came from it's the obvious thing. I wonder where that ship was from. Where did that alien derelict come from? Who is the space jockey? Why do they have all those eggs in the ship? I mean, that is the most obvious thing, I think, to ask. The problem is none of that matters. What I find interesting about prequel stories is unless the prequel it has something, it's a story unto itself, and what it does is it should illuminate the story that you fell in love with. Whatever's being prequelized, allow that story to illuminate the original, but not explain the original. Like, allow people to infer. You're like, oh, okay, well, that's where it's from. Like, we might never know why the alien derelict came to have. And indeed, I think the whole purpose, the whole point, you have to look at something like, okay, why do you love Alien? And aliens, for that matter. But the first Alien, the reason it's so groundbreaking is because it was alien. You didn't know. The all of those questions stand in for the infinitude of the cosmic void. You know, the great beyond, or what Lovecraft was writing about, the great old ones. Like, he could put these ideas in your head, but he couldn't exactly what explain it all. And the great thing about Alien was we were never supposed to know where the space jockey came from. We were never supposed to know why there's a derelict ship full of eggs. We don't know why there was a chestburster presumably in his chest. We don't know, and nor should we ever know. The only important thing is that the results of this cosmic mystery that we'll never know the answers, because we're never going to understand the infinitude of the universe. We will never know why God did what he did, or her, what she did, or it did what it did. We'll never know, and nor should we know. Nor should we know. By going and explaining that, you completely undermine the entire franchise of what Alien is supposed to be. That's why, I mean, I really don't... I think Prometheus and Alien Covenant, all it does is destroy the mystique of the original Alien. We should never know. Because we'll never know. Just like we're never going to know, why are we here? Is this all that I am? Is there nothing more? That's the great question of human existence. Why do we only live for a short period of time? I want more life, father, or fucker, depending on which version of Blade Runner you watch. And it's just the easy thing. Let's go explain this. Because it's the easy impulse. It's what we all, I wonder why. I don't wonder why. I'm content. I understand. I'm never going to know. I'm never going to know. And that's what the cosmic void is all about. We will never, ever know. I mean, you want to put the zap on your own mind? Start by looking at the Hubble Deep Field picture and then go from there. And when you start realizing just how big the universe is, get into your own total perspective vortex and see how much you mean in relation to the rest of the universe. And if you don't come out of there thinking to yourself, you know, what I mean is I mean something to me, you know, for the finite amount of time. You should mean something to yourself. Don't waste time worrying about what you mean to other people. Mean something to yourself and realize, listen to what Dr. Manhattan said about the thermodynamic miracle of life. He decided to come back and save humanity because you individuals, every single human being, each one of you represents why Dr. Manhattan came back to Earth to decide to save humanity from destroying itself. And that's the way we should be thinking. Anyway, at least that's what I think. So Desmond, I'm not a fan of prequels. I think it dumbs everything down. I don't dig it. Our man Claude Hibbert is here. Claude Hibbert, who I've noticed is watching a lot of, by the way, Whining About Movies. Episode 6 is tonight at 8 o'clock. We're talking about Andrzej Zulewski's Possession from 1981. Boy, was that an interesting movie to show Elizabeth. But we're going to talk about that tonight. If you haven't seen it, well, not many people have. but it's interesting. So Claude Hibbert writes in and says, "Hail Rob, our viceroy of verisimilitude, our duke of dope discourse, Watu, the watcher of the Imaginarium, and Observateur, I don't know, provocateur. So it's L'Observateur de Film. Rob, this letter is about me. Me. Let me begin by stating that I am a fan. Like you, I read and collected Chris Claremont-era X-Men, John Byrne's Fantastic Four, Frank Miller's Daredevil, and George Perez's Teen Titans. As a teenager, I read Lord of the Rings, La Morte d'Arthur, and Once and Future King. I loved Empire Strikes Back, Wrath of Khan, Aliens, and Terminator. At 14, I aspired to be a creator and at first an illustrator. I attended the High School of Art and Design in Manhattan with notable alumni like Jim Simon, Mark Teixeira, and Neil Adams. During my junior year, I chose to major in film and television production. At this time, I was introduced to Fellini, Costa-Gavras, Bergman, and Wells. David Lean's Lawrence of Arabia and Star Trek inspired me to enlist in the United States Air Force. I wanted to be a cinematographer, but I still yearned for a little adventure. I was stationed at Vandenberg Air Force Base near Lompoc, California, and assigned to an audio-visual squadron. Now, this was in the early 90s, and the Air Force was switching to digital and purchased the first Avid systems. Oh, dude, that was so dope. I remember that. We continuously ran photographic processing bays for motion picture film. The unit used the mechanized camera systems seen in Apollo 13, in which the operator sat on what looked like a white gun mount. Big white gun mount. The main mission was to film space and missile launches for analysis, but we also did periodic news and documentary pieces. On my own, I hunted down and found a discarded 35mm Arriflex camera to hone my skills. As we were developing video news stories about the space and missile program at Vandenberg Air Force Base, my friend and I purchased 3D software, Infinity, and installed it on a government Apple Power Mac 2600 or 6200. Yes, I remember a time when we could install personal software on government computers. With Infinity, my friend and I started to create bumpers for Air Force videos. Decision time came for me in 1996 when my commander connected me with a cinematographer in Hollywood who was also in the Air Force Reserves. She advised me on the dangers of entering the motion picture industry. She told me a story about her time working on Hook. Spielberg ordered her third camera unit to position a camera on the railing of the ship looking into the deck. They began to comply with the directive while Spielberg sat back in his chair for a drink. As he began to sip, just mere moments after issuing the order, he put down his cup and in a fit of rage screamed at her unit, demanding that they work quicker. The anecdote was to illustrate the difference in accountability from the military to the motion picture industry. She pointed out that Spielberg had the power of life and death over careers. There was no guaranteed paychecks, health care, or appeal process. This is par for the course, which is why she encouraged me to continue learning web development and 3D animation. So I did. I left behind the dreams of becoming the next Freddie Young, the cinematographer for You Only Live Twice, Dr. Zhivago, and Lawrence of Arabia. I managed to work as a creative for technology companies for over 10 years after that. I worked in Photoshop almost every day of my life for about 15 years. Today, I work for the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, the organization that you read about in Newsweek. I'm stationed in Washington, D.C., and we live in Alexandria, Virginia. By the way, my coworkers and I had a big chuckle at that article you read. Your channel, however, keeps me linked to the world of cinema. Robservations differentiates itself from other YouTube channels not only because of your insider's knowledge of the film industry, but you provide an egalitarian and nuanced perspective of life. Man, I cannot tell you how that makes me feel. Thank you, sir. That's what I try and do. The community that you're building is not only smart, but fair. I like that even more. Watching your channel seems most like film school, the Actors Studio, or the Charlie Rose Show. Why, Charlie? Why? I know. I think you would be really good at talking cinema with artists. You should book Mark Bernardin for an in-depth dive into storytelling. I should, actually. That's a good idea. My wife and I don't think that they would let him go on the show. Even I would say, Mark, because I've known him around. If he called me up and said, Rob, let's talk about Star Trek on your show or something, I would have to tell him, I'm like, dude, you really don't want to do that. Not that they even care what I have to say, but really, I mean, my involvement with Axanar, if Axanar hadn't been sued and we actually had Axanar out, it might have been different. But my involvement with Axanar really hurt my career on a number of different levels. So I wouldn't do that to Mark, but I wish him the best. Maybe after he's done with Picard, we could talk. But I'd like to, because he's a great guy. My wife and I look forward to watching you and Elizabeth on Whining About the Movies. Candida and I have been practicing our French, Portuguese, and Italian while we work from home. We look forward to 30,000 subs to hear Elizabeth parler français. She's actually a very great French speaker. She speaks fluent French with her mom. Thanks for reading my letters and my posts, Claudius. Well, thank you for Claude. I mean, I completely admire your career path and what you've done. I mean, how cool is it working for NORAD and working in Washington, D.C.? I mean, I wanted to be an astronaut, and it's a career, it's the path I didn't take. It's the road less traveled, I guess. Or maybe I did take the road less traveled. Who knows? But I really admire what you do, and congratulations for that. This next one, and by the way, thank you for participating in the Post-Geek Singularity, and thank you for the kind words during Elizabeth's whining about movies. It means the world to Elizabeth and to me. So thank you for that. I very much appreciate that. Tonight should be funny. Yep, we went from Betty Blue to Possession. From France to Germany. Cinema Gulp is here. Cinema Gulp says, greetings, notorious RMB and the Post-Geek Singularity. It's been an interesting few weeks for all of us. Some in hardcore shutdown quarantine mode, and some acting like slightly lesser versions of Mommy and Daddy Robeson from The People Under the Stairs. Nice reference. I have personally taken this time to rewatch Star Trek Enterprise, which, I must admit, is not nearly as bad as I remember. I've also gone back into my novel, which I completed and had edited back in 2016, only to have it been discarded by every literary agency within the continental United States. Seriously, I even submitted it to Black Sparrow Press, the publisher behind my favorite Charles Bukowski book, Pulp. The book took me 8.5 years to write, and now going back through my words and reflecting on where I was at the time of my life where I worked on different chapters is a fascinating experience. Having not looked at the manuscript, much less thought about it in the last couple of years, it was quite fun reading it, as if I'd never read it before, almost as if someone else wrote it. The opening chapter sees an aging college professor of Western civilization being forced into retirement. After that, said professor forms a split personality complex, one personality weak, vulnerable, yet optimistic and willing to listen to others, the other strong-willed, mentally unaffected, and full of energy. This refreshed a memory. That actually sounds fascinating to me. This refreshed a memory that had completely escaped me since 2008 when I started writing it. And that memory was that the original series, Enemy Within, was my inspiration for the character. I'd forgotten all about that, but it hit me like a ton of bricks as I continued page after page of character description, which is one of the reasons it was widely disliked. There have been several episodes in Trek history of malfunctioning transporters, but this was obviously the first, and in that, the scariest. Seeing Kirk morph into two distinct rivaling personalities was fascinating. Getting to my question to you as a writer, I thought to myself, what in life, fear, anxiety, paranoia, or discomfort, have truly inspired us to take up the pen or keyboard and start writing away? What have I written, whether as a child, a film student, or professional, has come from the scariest moments of my life? Perhaps this is why I chose this time to take back up my novel and see how I could better it to one day resubmit it with revisions. Have you ever examined that in your own life? Film, series, novels, or comics? Has your worst day or period of life ever aided you in your creativity? It certainly has for me. I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at me, and I'll tell you in a minute. It certainly has for me. I want to thank you as always for this forum. I watch you every day and find more and more common interests that we share with every new episode. I appreciate you taking the time to read my letter. Be safe and healthy to you and the Post-Geek Singularity. Cinema Gulp. Well, thank you, Cinema Gulp. Yeah, I mean, look, the only movie I ever made was about myself. I mean, Mark Altman and I basically wrote a script about ourselves. And, I mean, he started it. He started writing the script, and then we ping-ponged it back and forth. And it was really about Free Enterprise is really about the first 10 years I lived in Los Angeles. And I think that William Shatner if I were to go back and look at my own film, and I would tell you, what does it mean? William Shatner was a proxy for our dreams and, you know, what we wanted to achieve. And in befriending him, obviously William Shatner was a huge influence, so you could look at it literally, they got to befriend their childhood idol or whatever. But for me, more metaphorically, when I was approaching Free Enterprise, it was all about I've never really had fear in my life in terms of my own, how it related to me. I think I've been fairly pragmatic about myself throughout my life in terms of, like, I've always been like, let's just go do this. Like, I've never doubted myself at all. I've never had that, because I've always been like, well, if I don't know how to do something, let's go find other people that know and let's go do it. Like, I've always been like of that ilk. Like, let's go do this thing. You know, it's never been like, I really honestly believe, certainly I've always used the example, I'm never going to be LeBron James. So I would temper what I thought I could do. I wasn't tilting at windmills or something like that. But I you know, as Harry said, Dirty Harry Callahan said, a man's got to know his limitations. I've always been kind of that guy. And so I've never had fear about my life, but I've also, you know, constantly strived for dreams. And that's kind of what Free Enterprise is. So Free Enterprise is totally informed by my own life. And yeah. So I think you can't, to be a good writer is to write, obviously the old adage, write what you know. And I think you have to. And it's interesting. That book sounds really interesting. Like, what happens to someone from academia, a college professor being forced into retirement. I mean, today, go back and look what happened to Brett Weinstein at Evergreen, where I went to school, the Evergreen State College, after the student uprising of 2017. And what would happen if, I mean, nowadays, what if a professor who fell from grace with the administration because of being an academic? I mean, you could probably rewrite that story and make it very, very topical. That sounds really interesting to me. And look, you got to go back and do it, because if it's already written, so rewrite it, cut down your character description, tighten it up, you know, and resubmit it. You've already got it. Why is it languishing away? I think it's great that you've done that. And I think it's great that you've gone back in and you're looking at your past work and you're going to see where it's going to take you and what it means. And since it's already a personal story, make it even more personal. And I think, isn't that a great thing that we've had this sort of shutdown, which doesn't have to be, like, I've never been bored in my life. I've never been like Ming the Merciless. I never told my right-hand man, if I had one, I would never say, Clytus, I'm bored. What plaything can you offer me today? Why? Because look at this place. I don't need anyone else to offer me a plaything. But I think that what you're doing is you're using this time. Get back into that book. Refine it. Go back in and rewrite it. Turn it into something of today and sell that, son. Get it out there. Christopher Collins writes in and says, hey, Rob, I think seasons 1 through 4 of Star Trek The Next Generation may have the strongest emotional music due to the contribution of composer Ron Jones. I could not agree with you more. Who just hit those marks in episodes like The Battle, Booby Trap, The Defector, The High Ground, Evolution, Brothers, Best of Both Worlds Part 1 and 2, Reunion, Evolution, the Binar episode, just to name a few. The Klingon tea ceremony music, I don't even think it was used, but it's from the second season, the scene where Worf is engaging in the Klingon tea ceremony with Pulaski. Just to name a few. I was wondering, what do you think of season 7 of 9 of Next Generation? There are not as many emotionally strong episodes as compared to the episodes in seasons 1 through 4 because it was missing the music by Ron Jones. Do you think Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise would have benefited from having Ron Jones compose the music to hit those emotionally investing points? Well, for those of you who don't know, Ron Jones was, I think, the best composer. That's not to take away anything from Dennis McCarthy or Jay Chataway or any of the great composers who worked on Star Trek. But it really was the producers that mandated more of a sonic wallpaper when it came to the music. One of the great things about Star Trek, the original Star Trek, was the music. whether it's Saul Kaplan or Jerry Fielding or Alexander Courage. I mean, the original music for the original Star Trek TV series is some of the best music ever written for television, bar none. I mean, Twilight Zone, Star Trek, unbelievable. Outer Limits, there's some amazing music. And Rick Berman did not like that kind of music. He did not like music that had strong thematic elements. And Ron Jones got away with it, but Ron Jones was a pain in the ass. He took a long time. He was using innovative instruments. He was trying to do different and new and unique things. And his music, by far as especially if you're going to listen to it, is by far the best music that was created for Next Gen. And absolutely, that's not to say, that some people, I did think Jay Chataway did a lot of good cues, but yeah, Ron Jones was far and away my favorite composer for modern Star Trek. And I think that a lot of the reason why there's a lot of blandness. I'll tell you, you want to see something really telltale? In Troubles and Tribulations, the great 30th anniversary tribute episode for Star Trek, where, of course, the crew of Deep Space Nine goes back and visits the crew of the Enterprise from the episode Trouble with Tribbles. Listen, they replaced the music during the fight scene in when Cyrano Jones goes to the bar. And there's a fight scene in there, and they actually replaced, which to me is inexplicable, they replaced the original fight music from the original series, and they replaced it with music of 1996. And it was, I mean, if you ever want a graphic or oral depiction of what's different between the two shows, look no further. But you're absolutely right. Ron Jones was great. Was great. And you're absolutely right about that. People have been sending in some things here. So let me go back. Wow, there's a lot. I've been remiss. The founder 865 sent in a super chat and says, "Hi Robert, can I email you a letter? If so, how?" Well, you can email me a letter. Everybody can email me a letter. Right down there, Robservations at theburnetwork.net. Go to my website. Go to the website for the Burnettwork, which is at theburnetwork.net. And there is a link to send me letters. Send your letters there, please. And I look forward to it. Sam O'Neill sent in a super chat and said, "Hi, Rob. I sent you an Instagram DM of a cool highway wall painting that I pass almost every day on the way home. I would love it if you could check it out." Oh, I will look for that. I can't look for that right now, but I will look for that, and I'll get back to you. Dirty Nerdy tipped $1 and said, "Rob, what's your opinion of Star Trek The Final Frontier overall? I considered it one of the weakest movies, but it had moments I enjoyed. But what really irritates me is the turbo shaft scene with Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, deck 78 at the top of the ship. Really?" Okay, look, Star Trek V The Final Frontier, obviously directed by the mighty Shatner. However, actors on shows and in movies do not, nor can they, have the same experience that we have as fans. And William Shatner has never looked at the blueprints of the Enterprise, nor would he care to. He's an actor playing a part. When he leaves the set, he's thinking about riding his horses or playing tennis or anything other than Star Trek. We, however, as viewers of the show, our experience of watching something is totally different. So I think Star Trek V is, I've read his original treatment, Act of Love, and it's actually really good. I really like what Shatner came up with. And Shatner's novels that he wrote, I mean, the Reeve Stevens wrote the actual novels, but Shatner did come up with the general ideas, and the Reeve Stevens shaped those ideas, and they will be free. They'll absolutely tell you that. Yeah, I think, first of all, the editing in that sequence when they're flying up the turbo, it goes from deck 55 to deck 70. It's terrible. It doesn't work at all. Star Trek V is a very sloppy film. They ran out of money. They ran out of visual effects. They ran out of money, and they made a lot of mistakes. Brand Farron, who did a great job doing the visual effects for Altered States, was way out of his league. They were trying to shave money from the budget, so they didn't go back to ILM, which they should have. They went to Brand Farron, and the visual effects in Star Trek V are unbelievably piss poor. They are amateur hour to the nth degree. It's unbelievable. The movie doesn't have an ending, and one of the things that the studio made them do was inject all of this humor into the movie, so the tone is all over the place. I do enjoy what they were going for. I mean, if you told that same story, but you had a director who really knew what they were doing. Like, I would love to have seen Anthony Minghella, who directed The English Patient and The Talented Mr. Ripley. Or can you imagine Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, as directed by Denis Villeneuve? Same story. But man, that could have been good. Shatner was really just out of his depth. He tried hard. There's some beautiful cinematography in the film. But the tone of that movie, again, I think Leonard Nimoy, God bless him. Rest in peace, Leonard. I've met you. I've been to your house. I love, obviously, Spock. I loved everything you did. And I loved how you turned the death of Spock into leverage for you to get to direct your first feature. But I think one of the first time I didn't like Star Trek was Star Trek 3. And it was because actors, I'm sorry, but actors who are so closely, they can't be allowed to contribute too much, because they inherently, they're dealing with what they want and not necessarily what's best for the show or the characters, and it doesn't work out. But I think Star Trek V has a lot of great moments, but overall I think it's a failure as a movie, and it gives me no pleasure to say that. But I also think that Shatner did the best he could under very difficult and arduous circumstances that were beyond his control. They cut him off the knees, and they needed to give him his budget. The movie doesn't have an ending, and it could have been a much more satisfying film. And I think for the most part, there's a lot of stuff in Star Trek V that's really, really, really good. But the tone is all over the place. It was a very serious movie, and it should have been an emotional movie, and there are indeed emotional moments, but I just wish he had the money, and I wish he had the support. And I wish that he didn't have to deal. I wish he could have made the movie that he originally wrote, because his treatment was far more emotional, and the execution just, it didn't do it all justice. Chairman Mao says, all Kung Fu, Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, Hong Kong, Gun Fu fans need to get together and tell everyone Chinese people are awesome. The language, the culture, the traditions are awesome. It's the Chinese Communist Party that is to blame. The Chinese Communist Party doesn't care about that. Chairman Mao, I am with you 100%. Unfortunately, what can you do? I really do think it is the Chinese Communist Party, and hopefully it's instances like this. Look, I read today that a bipartisan, 2 senators wanted to officially blame China for this, and I agree, that sure, you could say this disease originated in China and the practices of the kind of trafficking, the kind of animals and things like that. But, you have a lot of people. The thing about China is, first of all, it's a gigantic country with one of the oldest, richest, and most wonderful histories of any country on Earth. And let's face it, they've also got Chinese girls, which is good. But I think that you also have a wide variety of culture. You have, on one hand, you have unbelievable urban centers like Shenzhen and Beijing, and incredible technology and all that. They're building the future. Amazing. But then you also have, really, you go back to some of the villages out there and the people that are buying this kind of wildlife and eating these things and all that. You've got a clash of cultures throughout the country, but you can't blame them. You do have to blame the communist government, and that's because, the communist government, and I have to be fair, though, the fact that they've allowed this weird hybrid of capitalism and communism to coexist has been sort of strange. And but yes, you can't blame. I'm a big fan of Chinese, the Chinese people. I'm a big fan of what they can do when they put their mind to it. I love Hong Kong, and I like Chinese girls. So there's all kinds of pluses there. And I agree with you. You can't blame one of the most beautiful and one of the most ancient cultures on Earth, and I hope we don't. And it's pretty stupid. But you know what? My man Tony Leung is going to be in Shang-Chi, and Tony Leung is the man. And I was just saying to a friend of mine who provides lots of experiential engagement, just the other day, I was saying, sometimes I just want to be Asian so I could be like Tony Leung in Hard Boiled and wear those suits, and then ultimately follow it up with being Tony Leung from In the Mood for Love. So there you go. One of my favorite directors is Wong Kar-wai, and there you go. Anyway, I agree. The Communist Party is to blame, and Chinese people are, in fact, awesome. So I'm with you right there. Ma La sends in a super chat and says, do you know of a random movie choice generator? I need to expand more than just the usual suspects. I don't know. A random movie choice generator. I have no idea. You know, you could make your own, like pick a letter, pick a letter in a year, and like 1964, the letter E, and the first movie that starts with the letter E that came out in 1964. Go watch that. You don't need a random generator. Make it up. Give yourself, you know, your own criteria. I don't know what that is, but I think that would be cool. Just a letter and a year, and find out what the first movie with the first letter. But you'll probably wind up watching a lot of crap that way. So maybe go by box office. Go pick a year and say the 5th highest grossing movie from that year. That could be kind of like, let's do it. Let's do it now, shall we? I want to do it now. I want to see if my randomly made up game. So box office for the year I was born. Let's say 1967. Okay. And we're going to pick the 5th highest grossing movie from 1967. And you know what? You are going to watch this movie, whatever it might be. Let's see. The number one top grossing movie, the 5th the 5th highest grossing movie of 1967. Oh man, is Thoroughly Modern Millie. Which I've seen. But you know what? I'll tell you what. You don't have to watch Thoroughly Modern Millie. It's not that it's a bad film, but I'll give you a choice. How about the 4th and the 6th? Thoroughly Modern Millie, we won't go that way. So here's a choice, and these are two very good choices. You either have to watch Guess Who's Coming to Dinner or The Dirty Dozen. I'll leave that up to you. One is action adventure and one social commentary. Both are great movies. So there you go. We together have come up with this. We have come up with this. So there you go, Mala. There's your random movie generator. Pick whatever, the 5th highest grossing movie of whatever year you pick. And there you go. You can watch Thoroughly Modern Millie, or I'll let you watch Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, or The Dirty Dozen. I'll leave that up for you to decide. Report back. Mika Eno, like Brian Eno. Mika Eno sends in a nice super chat. Thank you very much. Aliens, although a great movie, started the demystifying. By giving them a queen, Cameron turned the aliens into something we can comprehend. Oh, these aliens are just weird-looking ants. You are not wrong. Now, I agree with you. However, I understand where he was coming from with that, because if you looked at these drones, there were so many eggs, and it follows. I could see him making that leap, but it didn't necessarily bother me. But you're not wrong. First of all, you're not wrong. But on the other hand, I think, well, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. But it didn't bother me because it still doesn't explain where they came from or why was there a ship full of these clearly lethal creatures. What's interesting about, well, now we know, like the alien derelict ship, it's an engineer ship, which seems so silly, but they were carrying those eggs, which makes the engineers look dumb. But okay. But yeah, you're right. They're just weird looking ants. And that's true. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. Chairman Mao says the CCP changed the language, erased culture, and suppressed religions. To tie this to entertainment, don't doubt that their showing of American films isn't another way to exert influence and control through their increased box office share and investments. Oh, I don't. I read the Chung Kuo series. I know. Look at Firefly, China Around the World. I get it. I totally understand. But ultimately, I think at the end of the day, it's not going to survive. You know, I don't know how long it's going to take, but there you go. Attic Hatch Sound sends in a super chat and says, another moniker for me, your subcultural concierge. Subcultural concierge. I like that. Subcultural concierge. Yeah, there's so many names. Somebody should compile them all. I don't remember them. The Last King of Scotland sends in a super chat and says, why are we celebrating China opening its theaters? China is our enemy. They steal our jobs, our tech, our IP, and bribe our professors. China lied. People died. Well, okay. You're not wrong about all those things. But I think the Chinese government maybe is our enemy. But I really don't think that people, and I say this, and now I haven't traveled all over the world, but I've traveled around. And I don't think that China is our enemy. I think, as Chairman Mao pointed out, it's the Chinese government that is adversarial towards us. But most of the Chinese people I've met in my life have been pretty delightful. And I would not want to make an enemy of an entire group of people simply because I don't agree with their governmental policies. Remember, there's a lot of people in the Middle East that think that we're their enemy. And our actions have caused them to think that. So, yeah, I mean, China lied, people died, but didn't we lie about weapons of mass destruction during the Gulf War? How many Iraqis died because of that? So, let's try and not vilify all people and concentrate instead on bad government policy. But I don't entirely disagree with you. Evan Newman tipped $5 and says, random topic. A while ago, we had a discussion in the Facebook group about Jacob's Ladder. I love Jacob's Ladder. Someone mentioned that an alternate, better cut aired on a movie channel in the 90s. Did you see it and like this cut? That is actually true. If so, do you know how one could acquire it? There was a director's cut of Jacob's Ladder. I saw it, but I don't remember the differences. I am not sure, but I have no idea how to acquire it. It's never come out on physical media, I don't think. But yeah, I'd have to look that up. Well, hell, I have the newfangled internet right here. Let's see. Alternate cut. Alternate versions. Let's see what it says. Alternate versions. Wow, there's no alternate versions on the IMDb. Huh. I know that I read the script. The script is very different than, especially the ending, than what was made. But, a cursory look doesn't seem to present itself. But I'm sure that somebody would know. Somebody would know. Let's see. I got another letter here. And this next letter is from Clive Howard. Clive Howard. Let me jump into this. Let's see what Clive Howard has to say. Clive, buddy. Hi, Rob. Glad to see you're staying well and going strong. We need you more than ever to get through the days of lock-in. These crazy times provide an opportunity to cogitate life's big issues. Cogitate. Such as, why is everyone hating on franchises like Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who, and so on? This question has been covered in some extensive depth by yourself and other members of the Post-Geek Singularity. Many, many good points have been made, and I think there's no single answer. However, there's one reason that I'm sure has been raised. I'm not sure has been raised. Apologies if it has. That is the turnaround times on many of these franchises. Ooh, I like this. Take The Force Awakens. J.J. Abrams took over script writing on this October 2013, completing a first draft in 6 weeks, and announced the script was done in January of 2014. Interestingly, the original writer, Michael Arndt, said he needed another 18 months to complete the script. With Rise of Skywalker, the turnaround was a similar 3 months. The Star Trek Picard writers apparently had their season story done in 2 months. Yes, and it shows. You often talk about authorship and world building, the kind of thing we see in the works of Tolkien and Martin. These guys had years to craft their worlds, stories, and characters. George Lucas had the idea for Star Wars in 1971, 6 years before the film came out. He had 15 years to think about the prequels. Many movies, books, and TV shows have taken creators years to develop, to build rich worlds out of which comes deep and interesting stories and characters. But today, studios seem to want massive franchise properties churned out in record time. Of course, I get why. Cost. I feel this gives creators barely any time. It's unsurprising that when people compare Game of Thrones to the latest Star Trek, they feel the latter comes up short. I understand that franchises already have a lot to build on, which perhaps should make the job easier. But if you hire a writer's room for a new Star Trek series and expect them to have the season story finished 2 months later, that doesn't leave much time to watch the entire back catalog of Star Trek series and movies, which is why you should hire people that already have watched those things, let alone read the books. The resulting continuity errors are hardly surprising. I know it's the job of writers to turn out stories quickly, but with franchises that now have extensive canons, surely it's asking an impossible task of a creator, however good, to make something great when given virtually no time to do it, especially when they come to the franchise cold. I'm sure people will point to the MCU that churns out a lot of content and has seemingly been more successful with fans. However, I would argue that they have Kevin Feige, who has lived Marvel for decades. They appear to borrow more heavily from existing stories. The stories are greater as a whole than as individual parts. I would refer to John Campia's comments as to why Avengers Endgame is only the biggest grossing movie in history that hasn't won an Oscar. Perhaps studios should start giving creators more time to craft their worlds, immerse themselves in canon, and create great stories. It would be great to get your thoughts. Stay healthy. Clive. Well, Clive, let me tell you something. It's the writer's choice to lean so heavily into canon. I mean, in this show, we have Icheb, we've got Seven of Nine, we've got the Borg, we've got Bruce Maddox. They didn't have to tell a story like that. What they don't have is a story about Captain Picard himself. What does he want? Where's he at in his life? I mean, we know, of course, what's really interesting is you've got all these different stories grafted around stuff. And you've got two things happening that were the overarching stories. You've got this idea of synths, which remains undeveloped. We still really don't know. We're back to a robot story that we've seen a million times before, Android story. Basically, you're looking at Descent Part 1 and 2 again, but mixed with something else. And they chose to involve the Borg. They chose to involve all of these different elements of canon. You know, Hugh going back to Borg, Measure of a Man, Icheb, Seven of Nine. I mean, Riker and Troy. And then they created their own canon that they destroyed before we even got to it, which was Thaddeus, their firstborn, Riker and Troy's firstborn kid. We never got to meet him, but he's already dead, so we're dealing with grieving parents. So canonically, you're fundamentally changing your characters by giving them tragedy in their lives that we don't get to see or get to go through. And any one of those elements could have made for an interesting 10-episode arc. But instead, they both leaned heavily into canon, and they wanted to create their own story and create their own characters. I think that they should have done one or the other. Riker and Troy, Seven of Nine, Icheb, Hugh. Get rid of all those characters. You've got new characters. Why not just delve into that? Give us new characters instead of giving us a full series of half-baked old characters and half-baked new characters. I don't think it's time. Some of the great movies have been written very, very quickly. You know, no one was writing Casablanca over 10 years or something. I think it's the kind of stories they choose to tell. What you do, a great producer, and it has to be a great producer or showrunner, understands the limitations of what they're doing and how much they're working, and you got to know that. And when you've got 10 episodes, I think it's really important. The story should have been simple. It should have been a simple story, and they should have examined all aspects of that simple story. Instead, they've got this unbelievably convoluted story that ultimately introduces the idea of a galaxy spanning artificial intelligence or synth culture that wipes out organic life on a galactic scale. I mean, that seems pretty silly to me, but okay. I mean, why does it have to be in that Mary Sue article I read? Why does it have to be that? Why not make the story personal with great personal stakes? I mean, literally, this story for these stakes, if Picard, if Soji, or actually Dodge, didn't walk into Picard's chateau, there would be no story. And that's the problem with Picard, is that he was not the instigator of the story. This character wanders into his that he has some tenuous connection to, which still doesn't really work. And it would have been nice if he decided to do something. It was his quest, his journey, instead of being the secondary character where you just keep adding, like Elnor. Why is Elnor in this story? I don't know. Why do we do that? Why did we introduce the idea of a crime boss that 7 of 9 had to go kill? That's another show unto itself. Anyway, I do think it comes back to, your points are well taken, I think. But yeah, I don't think you need 10 years to write a great story. I think a great screenwriter and a great producer and great TV writers are used to working under pressure. I think what you have is a bunch of disparate writers that they're not working under the umbrella of a very self-assured showrunner, because they've had to deal with showrunning changes. Picard, you changed to Michael Chabon, and it was interesting looking. Michael Chabon wrote a majority of the end of the episodes. I mean, maybe he ended up writing half of the episodes of Picard, and clearly I don't know if he was up to snuff on it, but yeah, man. I don't know. I mean, I do know, but that's it's a good point that you're making still. This one comes from Kent Davis. Another letter. Rob, I'm listening to the Critical Drinker and Doomcock talk about cultural vandalism. They discuss how characters' fundamentals of characters like Picard, Luke Skywalker, and Spock have been ravaged by writers bankrupt of creativity. This seems to be the call of the day in Star Trek and Star Wars franchises. I've heard you address your issues with both of these franchises, but I was just thinking specifically about Star Trek at the moment and was wondering why this has not happened with the character of James T. Kirk to the same degree as much of the other characters I mentioned. Is this because his backstory is not as fleshed out in television and movies as the other two, and therefore does not have as many points to build a story upon, which these current writers can appropriate to the same degree? Some of this has been done in the bad reboot movies, some of it stupid, some of it okay, but not to the same degree. Could this be due to the fact that Shatner is still with us and they do not do this? He is a very strong personality who has a passionate following. I would imagine he would be very vocal if his character was taken down one of the incomprehensible character recompositions that we're seeing. I don't call these reconstructions because these writers do not have the patience or maybe the talent to actually do an actual reconstruction. They simply appropriate and do not recreate. Well, that's a good question. I mean, look, I think we did see that with Chris Pine, and I thought Chris Pine was really dumbed down in Star Trek 09. And by the time you get Star Trek Beyond, it's like, I'm bored of exploring, and are we doing any good out here? And I'm like, fuck you. I mean, I'm sorry, Simon Pegg, but fuck off. I mean, I really like Simon Pegg too, but that writing, I'm not saying that personally, Simon Pegg, because I really like Simon Pegg, and Simon Pegg has been involved in it. I mean, he's such a fan. If you haven't seen the Spaced series, you've got to see Spaced. It's way better than Big Bang Theory. And it's great. And I love the Cornetto trilogy, and I've really liked Simon Pegg as a performer. But I thought that, he co-wrote that script, and making Captain Kirk bored of his job was like, what? I mean, the whole point is that at the end of the day, the Star Trek characters are passionate about their jobs. They're not bored. They don't sit there. They're not... the Star Trek characters do not look into the infinite void and go, oh, what difference are we? We can't possibly make a difference out here. I hated that. I hated that. So they have tried to change the character of Kirk, but Shatner knows. I mean, he could make money. He's not going to badmouth a franchise that can always come back to him. He can always make money. He's a businessman. It ain't show friends, it's show business. But I think, the real problem is the people that are in control of these franchises is J.J. Abrams is, I mean, he's a guy that's, he's full of himself. And a lot of creative people are, but he wants to make something his own. No creative person or no person that has a healthy ego wants to go in and work on a project and honor someone else's creations and not make it their own as well. And I think that's the problem. I mean, that's why I feel like Ryan Coogler, I go back and I look at what Coogler, I always look at Creed, because Creed to me is a perfect example about how you go into an old franchise, honor it, create a new story, new characters, and move forward. I mean, I don't understand why, if I was making a Star Wars movie, I would go to Disney and go, you got to look at Creed. And the way Creed integrates and honors Rocky into that story, that's how you do it. And I would have said, maybe Force Awakens came out, I don't know when Creed came out, I don't remember. But that's how you do it. I look at Creed, I hold Creed up as how you go back and deal with a franchise. You honor the legacy of Rocky. You honor the legacy you honor the legacy characters, and you incorporate them into the story in a meaningful way, and then you can spin off Adonis Creed and his girlfriend, and that's how you do it. To me, it's the template of how it should be done. And the problem is, I'd swear to God, I would go into a meeting and explain this to someone, and people are like, yeah, but Creed's about boxing and Star Wars is about space. I'm telling you, that's what would happen. And you're like, okay. And you got to give up. But that's what you should do. And I think the problem is you have creators that want to put their imprimatur on it. They want to put their stamp on it and make it their own. I get it. I understand. But there's ways of doing that honor it. It's just, is there money in that? Let's give C-3PO a red arm. So whenever you sell a red-armed C-3PO, Bad Robot gets some cha-ching. Let's give the Millennium Falcon a rectangular dish. Cha-ching. I mean, it's such a weird, it's weird stuff. But Kent, I appreciate you writing in. And look, I have to say, I love listening to Critical Drinker. Red Letter Media and Critical Drinker. I mean, in a way, Critical Drinker has a persona. It's a little Plinkett-esque. But I think Critical Drinker is one of the most astute examiners of genre entertainment that we have. And I think I think he's very, very funny. And he must spend a lot of time writing his material because it's really, really good. And I really appreciate where he's coming from, because what he points out is pretty bang on the money. I don't agree with him 100% of the time, but I would say that 80% of the time I probably do, maybe even more. And his investigations are worth looking into. And I think another part of it too is that, you're dealing with the character of Spock. Okay, let's give him a learning disability. I mean, no, dude. He's already challenged in that he's a person of two worlds. That's his quote-unquote disability. And to go in and he doesn't have a learning disability, but we got to make him more relatable. Let's make Tilly on the spectrum, because she would never be on a starship. That's what I hate about it. Starships are egalitarian, and they're a meritocracy, and they're about the elite of the elite. And they deal with that. They've got Barclay. You've got your character of Barclay, but don't get me started. I'll go off again. But anyway, hey, Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, in DS9, most characters, both primary and secondary, have interesting character development. If you compare it to TNG, there's basically 3 characters that develop. Those are Picard, Data, Worf. Riker, Troy, and LaForge have good moments, but very little development. Well, I agree with you. Picard, Data, and Worf were absolutely the standouts in TNG. But I do think that each character, Riker got Thomas Riker, his transporter duplicate, But you're right. I mean, it would have been, but it was interesting to see, like, he kept getting offered a command, and Riker, Jonathan Frakes told me, he says he actually used the word prat. He thought Riker became a bit of a prat by turning down all those command opportunities. But you're right, Troy and LaForge and Crusher as well. Very little character development. And I think, on a show they go with the people that stand out. But you're right. I agree. DS9 though, it's not just the primary characters; it's also the secondary characters. Whether you're Damar, Garrick, I mean, all the characters that they introduced, Rom and Nog. What they did with all those characters, DS9 is a true ensemble in every sense of the word, and a great ensemble it was. And I love it for that reason, Stubble. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that brings me to an end to the end, or a end. But what is an end but just another beginning? Anyway, the end of Robservations, episode number 372. Wow, 372, my God. Of course, I want to thank everybody here. I want to thank everybody for supporting the channel in every way that you do, whether you're writing letters, whether you're sending in super chats or tips, which I very much appreciate in this time, but also being on the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page, being active on Twitter, going to the Whining About Movies page. It means a lot. It keeps the channel going. And you know who else keeps the channel going? Our great moderating staff. The Mayor, Mike Bodden of Riverdale, Iowa. Of course, Detective Jim Boyers. Watch out. He knows what you've been doing. He has access to all the records. He can come get you. And then there's, of course, the great Greg Smith, my old friend Greg Smith. And then there is Louis Yu, who has had some recent tragedy in his life, and same with Jordy Lyons. Two great moderators who, despite whatever's going on, still are here kicking ass and taking names. You're being watched by all of us. Just kidding. You're not really. But anyway, I want to thank everybody, and the Richard over at the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page, stirring up things and having watch parties. And again, even on the Facebook page, it's great. And if you like these chats, please hit like. Please hit the little bell so you know when I'm going on. And I really want to thank a special thanks to our Puerto Rican, Roberto Suarez for his amazing video about Elfquest. If you want to send me videos like that, please do so. I will play them. I'm going to put that video up as its own thing. I'll put a little introduction to it. So I want to thank Roberto for doing that. What a cool video. It was a great way to start the show. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to say, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. I invite all of you to join me and Elizabeth tonight, whining about movies, about 1981's Zulewski-directed Possession, starring Sam Neill and Isabelle Adjani. And boy, what a movie that is. So, I sign off now. I will see you tomorrow, not on the John Campea show because it's Thursday, but I will be back here probably at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So fire in whatever you want to fire in, and we will have another discussion about something relevant to whatever's going on as far as imagination connoisseurs are concerned. And guess what that might be? Who knows? Yeah, okay. It's about Picard. Tomorrow we're talking Picard. It's going to be the season finale of season 1 of Picard, episode number 10. Are they going to stick the landing? Is there going to be a landing to stick? Are we going to see this godlike race of ancient synths that just exterminate biological life on a galaxy by galaxy basis? Why does the Q allow that? I wouldn't if I were the Q. But anyway, I warn you in advance, tomorrow is going to be Picard. Unless, it does something in my mind and I can't talk about it. But anyway, see you tomorrow. And as always, remember, have a better day. Actually, I won't see you tomorrow. I'll see you tonight. Whining About Movies, 8 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. Be there. Possession, 1981. Check it out. Yes, have a better day.